I am going to challenge you today. There is far more to say about this subject than I can say in this one message. And so I did my best to lay out much more in the notes. And so I encourage you to get the notes because there's far more in the notes than I can say just myself from here. But I am challenging us. It's from a conviction of the Lord to me, our family, to break that addiction to busy, that we are busy and it's not healthy for us. It's killing our souls. It's creating a sense of restlessness or exhaustion in the soul. And the problem is not a busy schedule. It is a hurried soul. It is what happens on the inside of us, not just on our calendars, but our soul that is the real problem. Ronald Rolheiser, a Catholic author, said this: we are distracting ourselves into spiritual oblivion. Pathological busyness, distraction, and restlessness are major blocks today with our spiritual lives. And the thing about busy and hurry that's so important is you cannot be both in a hurry and intimate. You cannot develop intimacy in a hurry. You may be able to have quick communication exchanges. You may be able to briefly connect, but you cannot develop the kind of intimacy that marks good, healthy relationships, whether it be relationship with God or relationship with others. Corrie ten Boom is attributed to saying, if the devil can't make you sin, he'll make you busy. You might not be tempted to sin, but busyness can do just as much harm and damage to our spiritual lives. And at its root, what it comes down to is you cannot be both hurried and loving. Jesus said the great commandment is to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And so love becomes the benchmark of true discipleship. All spiritual formation is to develop us in this one thing, that we are more loving. We are loving our God with depth and with our whole lives. And we love each other in sacrificial service, in mercy and in patience. The first definition of love that the Apostle Paul gives in 1 Corinthians 13 is that love is patient. And I can tell you, personal experience, I cannot be hurried and patient. And if I'm impatient, I'm not loving. We've got 5 kids. We trying to get anywhere is a lot of work, and we are working our way into being on time to anything. And so it's hard. And so when you get in a hurry, you are not patient, and love is patient. And so we are not loving while also being hurried. Japanese theologian Kosuke Koyama said this in his book, The 3 Mile an Hour God. Says God walks slowly because he is love. If he is not love, he would have gone much faster. Love has its speed. It is an inner speed. It is a spiritual speed. It is a different kind of speed from the technological speed to which we are accustomed. It is slow, yet it is Lord over all other speeds, since it is the speed of love. And the bottom line is that we cannot follow an unhurried Jesus when we ourselves are hurried. And you are not following Jesus if you are trying to speed ahead of him. And Jesus has his speed. It's annoyingly slow. Yet, it is the speed of love. And when we find ourselves hurrying past him, we are not developing love. We are not becoming more loving people. And so we are learning how to unhurry our lives, get our lives out of the busy mode. And here's the thing that what I discovered last service is going to be the first point of disagreement between you and I. We'll see. We'll test it. Service 2. The solution to an overbusy life is not more time. There's a few more amens here. Okay. All right. We'll just hope that's true elsewhere. It's not more time. You and I get the same 24 hours. No matter how much I've interceded and prayed and fasted, we haven't got a 25th hour in the day. God's not giving extra hours during the day. We didn't get an 8th day of the week. We didn't get more days in the year. We have the same amount of time. So the cure to a busy life is not get more time. We have to think differently. We have to change our minds about something, not just figure out how to cram more in what we already have. And so Jesus' words is an invitation. Matthew chapter 11, verse 28, he says, come to me, all you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light. Jesus' invitation is twofold. Come to him, take his yoke. The come to me part, we probably resonate with that. It seems pretty straightforward, maybe self-evident, that of course we've come to a place where we know we can't save ourselves. We can't deliver ourselves. We are our biggest own problem. Like we cause the most problems for our life. And so just in this large macro sense, we kind of get the hint that like we do need to come to Jesus. But it's the everyday small things that is also the invitation to come to him. And it's connected not just to believe certain things about him or accept certain things about him, but to take his yoke. And that's a phrase that does not mean a lot to us in this age. And so I'm going to let one commentator, Frederick Bruner, say it. He says it very simply and succinctly. He says this: a yoke is a work instrument. Thus, when Jesus offers a yoke, he offers what we might think tired workers need least. They need a mattress or a vacation, not a yoke. But Jesus realizes that the most restful gift he can give the tired is a new way to carry life, a fresh way to bear responsibilities. Realism sees that life is a succession of burdens. We cannot get away from them. That instead of offering escape, Jesus offers equipment. Jesus means that obedience to his Sermon on the Mount, his yoke, and this is probably the briefest definition of a yoke we can give, is that a rabbi, a teacher, of which Jesus was a rabbi, a teacher, his teachings were considered a yoke. You would take the yoke of a rabbi when you came under his authority and you lived out his teachings, because the teachings wasn't just to gain knowledge, it was to become someone. You lived out the teachings. So when Jesus invites us to take his yoke, he's inviting us to take all of his teachings, to come under his authority and to learn from his teachings. He says that obedience to his Sermon on the Mount, his yoke, will develop in us a balance and a way of carrying life that will give more rest than the way we have been living. So it's not escape Jesus is offering. It's actually a different kind of work, a different way to approach work, a different way to understand life, and we have to change our thinking, and it's called his yoke. So the key is not that we escape our responsibilities or life's burdens, nor is it more time. The key is coming to Jesus and taking his yoke. And it makes us able to bear life's burdens in a way that is easy and light. Dallas Willard called it the secret of the easy yoke. Probably my favorite book from Dallas Willard, The Spirit of the Disciplines. He has a whole chapter devoted to these verses about the yoke of Jesus. And he says this: the secret of the easy yoke involves living as Jesus lived in the entirety of his life, adopting his overall lifestyle. Our mistake is to think that following Jesus consists in just simply loving our enemies, going the second mile, turning the other cheek, suffering patiently and hopefully, and 100 other bits of his teachings. But while we live the rest of our lives just like everyone else around us, it's a strategy bound to fail. Meaning you can't live like everybody else and think that spontaneously we will automatically follow Jesus' teachings when it comes to things like loving our enemies. I can tell you the most natural thing for you and I to do is not love our enemies. You will not automatically love our enemies. And Dallas Willard says that is the ultimate standard of discipleship, whether or not we would spontaneously love our enemies. We know we are a mature disciple when we spontaneously love our enemies. My guess is we're not there yet. So we can't think that we will just randomly or automatically follow Jesus' teachings in the highlights of life, but then live our lives like everybody else does. And so the bottom line is if you want the life of Jesus, if you want to experience the life of Jesus, you have to adopt his lifestyle. We live the totality of our lives like Jesus, and this is where spiritual disciplines come in. Spiritual disciplines are not holiness or righteousness. They don't make you better before God. They don't make you holier before God. They don't make you more right with God. No spiritual discipline can do that for you. In the same way, obedience to a law doesn't make you holier. We're not legalists. We're never going to be legalists. If you're a legalist here, you're going to find something to get mad at. I might as well make it today. If you're a legalist but like it around here, keep that to yourself. Okay? What a legalist assumes is that if I can obey the rules correctly, I am more holy. I am better. And that's never going to work. We are made right before God, not because of anything we've ever done or not done. We are made right before a holy God because of what Jesus has done for us in the shedding of his blood, in the forgiveness of sins, and in the resurrection. That's what makes us right before God and nothing else. Faith in Jesus is it. That does not mean we can do whatever we want the rest of our lives. It does not mean that there aren't things in our life that aren't helpful for us. And that's where spiritual disciplines come in. They are not in the category of righteousness or holiness. They are in the category of wisdom. Maybe even sanity or health. So an advocacy for spiritual disciplines is not an advocacy to have more rules and more stuff to do in your life. It's an advocacy to arrange our life around Jesus. And that requires commitment and discipline, not just spontaneity. Spontaneity is good. It's just not the same thing. Discipline's plague. And so to unhurry our lives, I realize that's bad grammar. To break the addiction to busy, we need to look at adopting different habits. And so I want to look at 3 habits over the next few weeks that will help us unhurry our lives. The first of which I'll hit today, would be Sabbath. Later, we'll hit discipline, simplicity, and silence and solitude. And I chose these because chances are we are terrible at them. The nice and friendly thing to do is to talk about prayer and worship. And even those things I don't think we're that great at, but at least we know something about. Sabbath, silence, simplicity, things like that are a little more of a challenge. So I'm hitting those because these things will greatly contribute to unhurrying your life. And it requires us to take the yoke of Jesus in doing this. Coming to him, taking his yoke. Now, the Sabbath and dealing with the Sabbath, I realize even in our church, I know in some of our campuses, there are practicing Messianic Jews. And so this can get a very touchy subject. There are many people who have many opinions, and Christians have proven to not be able to get along around this thing. And so there's a lot that could be covered, and I'm having to willfully make myself skip over large pieces. So I put them in the notes, and even then, it's just brief summary. When you approach the Sabbath, you can approach it on 3 main things, and I can only barely highlight the first 2. We're talking about the theology of the Sabbath, or the theology of the Sabbath, the principle of the Sabbath, and the practice of the Sabbath. I really want to get to practicing the Sabbath, so I have to breeze through the theology of the Sabbath and the principle of the Sabbath. And so if these things make you mad or upset you or confuse you, first consult the notes. And if you're still confused after looking through the notes and following all the footnotes, there's a whole list of recommended reading. If you want to get mad at me and haven't looked at any of the books that I recommended, read them first, then we can talk, okay? So the theology of the Sabbath. Here's the bottom line with the theology of the Sabbath. Everything we read and see in the Old Testament concerning the Sabbath is a type and shadow of Jesus. It is a signpost that points to the reality that is Jesus. God did design the world in a 7-day rhythm, 6 days of work, 1 day of rest. And so it became part of the covenant with Israel. And all of these things were not about the thing themselves. They were about Jesus. Colossians chapter 2, this is some of what the Apostle Paul says. Verse 16, so don't let anyone condemn you for what you eat or drink, or for not celebrating certain holy days or new moon ceremonies or Sabbaths, plural Sabbaths. Verse 17, for these rules are only shadows of the reality yet to come, and Christ himself is that reality. That our restlessness in life, our slavery in life needed a reprieve. And as the 7th day rest was a natural rest from the 7 days of work, There's 6 days you work, the seventh day rest. That was a signpost to a far greater reality that Jesus makes it to where our labors are not what makes us right before God. Our efforts and our works do not make us right before God. Jesus makes us right before God. And so what the Sabbath was in symbol and in shadow, Jesus is in reality. And that's all I can say about that. So if we want to argue and fight over the Sabbath, let's look first at Jesus, not at the Sabbath. Okay, and there's more to that, but we got to move on. The principle of the Sabbath, and this is where it gets sticky when people really want to hammer down on what day is the Sabbath. And you have the Jewish people practice very rigidly 6 p.m. on Friday night to 6 p.m. on Saturday, so that Saturday, the seventh day, was the Sabbath. As Christianity took off and there was more development on the theology and practice of following Jesus, in the early centuries, it started to morph that the Lord's Day, Sunday, became a Sabbath for early Christians. And so the question, well, which day is the Sabbath? To some groups, they're going to say, well, duh, obviously it's Saturday. And then to other groups, it's like, well, it's obviously Sunday. Which is it? Neither. Jesus is the Sabbath. The principle of the Sabbath is 6 plus 1. And we'll look at the law here in just a second. The principle is 6 days you shall work, and on the seventh you rest. Well, what day is that for you? I don't personally like it that our world has gotten to where it's always work. And so I get that there's some people, maybe some people here, you're going to have to go to work. And so Sunday is a work day or Saturday is a work day. And so there's no sense in putting really ridiculous, legalistic boundaries around you and say you're violating the Sabbath. The Sabbath is 6 days you shall work, the seventh you rest. And if none of that is to the Lord, then you're doing it wrong anyway. Jesus is our Sabbath rest, but there is great wisdom and natural law, not moral law, natural law to a 7-day cycle that is 6 plus 1. That's the principle. The principle is 6 days you shall work, the seventh you rest. Romans chapter 14, this is the kind of stuff that gets Paul killed. When Paul wrote the letter to the Romans as a way to resolve conflict between Jews and Gentiles. That's what the whole purpose of that letter was for, is that there were splits going on between Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians. And he's like, guys, that's anti-Christ. Come on, we got to come together. And so his master work of theology through the whole letter of Romans is actually for the very practical purpose of the church to get along. Imagine that. The churches from the first did not get along very well. He says this, verse 4 of Romans 14, who are you to condemn someone else's servants? Their own master will judge whether they stand or fall, and with the Lord's help, they will stand and receive his approval. In the same way, we don't belong to laws, we don't belong to other people, we belong to the Lord. It's with that context, he says, in the same way, some think one day is more holy than another day, while others think every day is alike. You should be fully convinced that whichever day you choose is acceptable. So if you need to Sabbath on Monday, be fully convinced. But here's the key. This is the key to this. Verse 6, those who worship the Lord on a special day do it to honor him. Whatever day that is, honor the Lord. It's not about you. It's not about you looking all holy and righteous and above other really dumb people who just always work. It's about honoring the Lord. Whatever day that is. And so the principle is 6 plus 1, and that 1 is to honor the Lord. It's with that practical purpose that for most people, Sunday does make sense. For most people, Sunday makes sense because it involves worship. And I'll get to that when we talk about the practice. Okay, the practice of Sabbath. Here's the bottom line about the practice of Sabbath. It was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Okay, this is even embedded into the law. The fourth law of the 10 commandments, the first top 10, the fourth law is the Sabbath law, and people think that the law is remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. But here's the deal. If you take the entire 10 commandments and you do it about word count, the amount of words are used per commandment. The fourth commandment, the Sabbath commandment, takes up between 25 and 30% of the entire 10 commandments. And here's the deal, just for the sake of some sarcastic humor, okay? I'm setting you up. This is sarcasm, okay? When we think, well, because of Jesus, Sabbath doesn't matter anymore. And we're going to talk the practice, and I think the practice matters. But sometimes we've tried to merge the theology of Sabbath and the practice of Sabbath and flattened it, gotten rid of it, and we are now slaves. Theologically literate slaves. But in the same way, if I came to you and I said, hey, would you help me murder someone? Now, I get that I got some friends out there that's like, who are we talking about? Like, I'm not talking about that. It's still a good idea to not murder, correct? Now, not murdering doesn't make you more holy before God, right? Because we don't appeal to the law for holiness. But it's wisdom to not murder, correct? Pick any of the commandments. It's still a good idea. If I tried to convince you to bow down to an altar, a god, you'd be like, there's something feels off about this. We probably shouldn't do that. But when we say work 7 days, we're like, yeah, we're free. We're free from the law. When the fourth law, the fourth commandment, takes up nearly over a fourth of the whole 10 commandments, there's some value in this. And again, not for an appeal to holiness, but there is wisdom here. And so here's the law. The law is not remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. That's verse 8. That's the first line. Verse 9, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. 10, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male servant or your female servant or your livestock or the sojourner who is within your gates. Verse 11, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. I got to make a couple quick points about this. First, the law is 6 days you shall work, and the seventh, remember that day, set it aside as sanctified, holy, and do it to the Lord. It's an expression of worship, not an expression of holiness. It's an expression of honor. And what are we honoring? We're honoring the Lord, but we're also honoring what the Lord has blessed, the seventh day. And again, if that day for you is Saturday, 2 thumbs way up. If it's Sunday, great. But if it has to be a Wednesday because of the season of life you're in and the work cycles, great. That day is your seventh and it's unto the Lord. So for those who are afraid that we're advocating for laziness, let me double down here. 6 days you shall work. Not 40 hours, not 70 hours, not 20 hours, not 1 day, not 3 days, not 5 days. 6 days you shall work. Now work includes paid and unpaid, because let's face it, there's a lot of stuff we got to do that we don't get paid for. And it's still work. 6 days you shall work. So the advocacy is hard labor and worshipful rest. That's the principle and the practice. The practice is do your work in 6 days. And I get you might be in a season where you're unable to find work, unable to get work, or just unable to work. Listen, there's no condemnation. I'm not trying to condemn anyone. But for those who want to live well before the Lord, we are seeking a way to honor him, and part of how we honor him is work. Work is not a part of the curse of the fall. Work is part of what it means to be made in God's image. And that's all there in Exodus and in Genesis 1. It's part of being his image. Toil and slavery to our work is a part of the curse of the fall. And so rest is what God blesses. He blesses 6 days of work, seventh day, he blesses that day. Now, 3 times in Genesis 1 and 2, in the story of creation, the word blessed is used. He blesses the animals, and connected to that blessing is fruitfulness. Be fruitful and multiply. He blesses humans in Genesis 1:28. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, and have dominion. So with that blessing comes a commission. There's fruitfulness and a commission. And the third time In Genesis 2, when it's a summary of all of Genesis 1, he blesses the seventh day. Do you not think those are related? When one word is used 3 times, 2 times it specifically designates it as fruitfulness. The third time, it's the seventh day rest that is fruitful. We think it's the 6 days of labor that's the only part of fruitfulness, and the seventh day is a waste of our fruitfulness. I'm really trying to hit some of you really hard. But no. The seventh day is blessed, meaning there's a unique fruitfulness that comes from honoring that day unto the Lord. Not being a legalist about it, not being nasty and self-righteous about it, honoring the Lord. And so we commit to practicing this not because we are slaves to it. Jesus made this very emphatic point in Mark chapter 2, verse 27. He says, the Sabbath was made to meet the needs of people, not people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath. And that's when he asserts in verse 28 that he is Lord even over the Sabbath. So he's Lord over the Sabbath. The Sabbath was a gift. It was made to be a blessing. It was made to provide fruitfulness to our labor, not just be slaves to it. Andrew Sullivan, a writer for the New York Times Magazine, wrote an article, I Used to Be a Human Being. It's a bit tongue-in-cheek, and he's not even a believer, and this is what he says. The Judeo-Christian tradition recognizes a critical distinction and tension between noise and silence, between getting through the day and getting a grip on one's whole life. The Sabbath, the Jewish institution co-opted by Christianity, was a collective imposition on relative silence, a moment of calm to reflect on our lives under the light of eternity. It helped define much of Western public life once a week for centuries, only to dissipate with scarcely a passing regret into the commercial cacophony of the past couple decades. It reflected a now battered belief that a sustained spiritual life is simply unfeasible for most mortals without these refuges from noise and work to buffer us and remind us of who we really are. That's why we practice the Sabbath. Jeremiah 17, one of the harshest criticisms from all the prophets was about the Sabbath. But again, all of that was signposts pointing to Jesus. But this is one of the things he says. I'm going to read from verse 22 to 24 in the Message Bible. The context is verse 21 to 27, and I encourage you to read that whole context. He says things that I chose not to because it'd provoke you in ways I don't want to provoke you. So verse 22, don't use the Sabbath to do business as usual. Keep the Sabbath day holy as I commanded your ancestors. They never did it, as you know. They paid no attention to what I said and went about their own business, refusing to be guided or instructed by me. But now, take seriously what I tell you. Quit desecrating the Sabbath by busily going about your own work, and keep the Sabbath day holy by not doing business as usual. There is a day dedicated once a week to not be business as usual. Let me reiterate. 6 days you shall work. Put your hand to the plow. Get the work done. Don't be lazy. The problem is that because we don't have a designated day, we try to only get pockets of Sabbath that are sprinkled forever, and we end up burning ourselves out. And our lives do not follow a rhythm that is Christ-centered. Our lives follow a secular rhythm where it's work, vacation. Work, vacation. And then in some cases, you're looking at other people in vacay mode, and you see sort of longfully other people's vacation life, and you feel like your life is just never going to reach this point of leisure and delight and joy. And here's the deal. That's not a rhythm that God implanted into all of creation. He put a rhythm in creation that you and I follow. 6 days we work. And the seventh we rest. 6 days we work, and the seventh we rest. 6 days we work, and the seventh we rest. We're incited by Paul in Romans chapter 12, verse 2, to not copy the behaviors and customs of this world. And here's the deal. When it comes to our work, I cannot tell a difference between most Christians and anyone who's not. Maybe you're a little kinder. But when it comes to the rhythms of work, we're all just wanting escape. We find our identity in our work, and we work, and then we burn out. Or we know we're going to burn out, so we take a vacation. It's usually too short. We don't really enjoy that time. And then we get back to work, because that's what we really got to do is get back to work. Don't you know all these needs, all these bills that's got to get paid? Uh, a writer from Portland, A.J. Swoboda, says this: Sabbath has largely been forgotten by the church, which has uncritically mimicked the rhythms of the industrial and success-based West, the success-obsessed West. There's a lot of S's, sorry. The result? A road-weary, exhausted churches have largely failed to integrate Sabbath into our lives as vital elements of Christian discipleship, not legalism, Christian discipleship. It is not as though we do not love God. We love God deeply. We just don't know how to sit with God anymore. The result of our Sabbath amnesia is that we have become perhaps the most emotionally exhausted, psychologically overworked, spiritually malnourished people in history. True statement. So, if we're not going to fight over legalism, if you want to have that fight, I don't want to have it, so we're not going to have that fight. If this is something that you sense resonating, like, hey, there's a way to do this without legalism, and I need it. God designed the world this way, and I need it. I want to help. And we're going to quickly go through 4 ways that you can approach Sabbath. I found this to be very helpful. This comes from Pete Scazzero, pastor and author out of New York on emotionally healthy discipleship. And he lays out 4 things that should make a good Sabbath. Stop, rest, delight, contemplate. Stop, rest, delight, contemplate. If you can remember these 4 things, this will really help you at least start trying to prayerfully consider what this looks like in your life. Stop, rest, delight, contemplate. Stop work, enjoy rest, practice delight, and contemplate God. Okay, breaking each one of these down, stop. The word Sabbath, Shabbat, in Hebrew just literally means to cease or to stop. So we stop working. We stop striving. We stop our slavery. We stop judging. We stop worrying. Just stop. And most of us, I probably got to put a little extra time here. Most of us don't know how to stop until the work is finished. I can't stop until ... The project's done, the task list is over, I've balanced the budget, the laundry's done. Here's the thing, the one thing that will always be there for you, I don't know if people will be there for you, but the one thing that'll be there for you is laundry. It's never gonna give you up, never gonna let you down. Yeah, so we think we gotta finish, if I just finish this, and this, like then I can rest. And I'm not saying those things aren't important. I'm not saying those things don't matter. I'm not saying that those things don't have some psychological weight to it because you're responsible. It's just that they belong in 6 days. Because let me tell you the blunt truth. You're gonna die. And you're gonna have unfinished work. And though there should be grieving sorrow, the work will go on. God is very well capable of ruling this universe and getting his work done without you. God is not wringing his hands, oh man, I really got to keep this person alive because the work's not going to get done unless they kill themselves doing the work. And God's not doing that. He's ruling the universe very well capably without you and I. And the thing is, the work's never going to get done because as soon as you finish that work, guess what? You're going to find something else. If you don't learn to stop, then you're gonna always find something else and you'll never rest. And that's the mindset, the thinking of a slave. And you and I are not slaves to our work. So if there genuinely are things that you know you cannot rest until they're done, work to get them done in 6. You got 6 days. Plan it. Find a way to get those things done and then stop. You are not made to be unceasing in your labor. There is only one who neither slumbers nor sleeps, and that's God, Psalm 121, verse 4. You and I have to slumber and sleep. We have to rest. You cannot go on and on. You are not, there is only a part of you that's infinite, and it ain't your body or your mind. You got to stop. And you got to find a way to put what's necessary in 6 days and do the work in 6 and then stop. And so what kinds of activities, paid or unpaid, constitute work for you? It's not the same for everyone. And then whatever things make that list, that's what you stop. You designate 6 days to do those things. Again, that's paid and unpaid, because you might have a job, but there's lots of stuff to do around the house. There's lots of chores that got to get done. Lots of action items that have to be taken care of in just life and family and you don't get paid for those things. You probably don't even get thanks for them, but they got to get done. So get them done in 6 days. And that's especially important. I won't have time to talk about the day of preparation, but it's especially important on the 6th day. The 6th day is where you prepare for the 7th day. And so you find a way to get it done. If you really cannot rest until dishes are done and laundry's done, find a way to get it done in 6. And then stop. And you're gonna be terrible at it at first. And all that stuff, that basket of laundry that got washed but never folded. Or is there a plural on that basket? Baskets. It's gonna talk to you. It's gonna call out to you. It's gonna holler every time you see it. And it's gonna take time to figure out how to stop. Whatever that is for you, you might go look out in your yard and just be like, it's talking to me. I gotta do this thing. And you gotta learn to stop. Because you're gonna die one day, either way, and the work's still gonna be undone. And you need to get used to that. You're gonna have to learn to trust God and not think yourself to be God. Rest, what do you replace? All this time you're gonna have not working, what do? Sit around, twiddle your thumbs, and look at all the things you're not doing? No. You replace it intentionally with rest. What kinds of activities or non-activities are restful for you? What kinds of things replenish energy? You have to identify the things that drain energy, and you don't do those things. Those can be, here's just like a list for you of just stuff that you could stop and replace it with rest. Obviously, at the top of the list is work, but physical exhaustion, stop. Stop it. Find a way to replace it. Hurriedness. What if you had a day where you didn't hurry? You drove the speed limit. You didn't pull your phone out waiting in line. You didn't snap at your kids. Multitasking. Here's the deal. Tons of data and research on this. Multitasking is a lie. There's no such thing. Your brain cannot multitask. It can only rapidly switch between two actions, which basically has turned your focus less than a goldfish. There's hard data on this. Goldfish attention span is 8 seconds. Our generation, you know what our attention span is? 7. We have less attention span than a goldfish. How about you choose a day to not worry? One of my friends, he says, Sabbath is a no judgment day. Because like his internal work is learning how not to judge self. Like aspiring to some perfectionism. And so that needs to carry on through the rest of his life. But he says, you know what? I give myself permission on Sabbath to not judge myself. Competitiveness, a day where you don't have to be number one. Decision making, we all get decision making fatigue. I pretty much wear the same thing every day because I don't like to make that decision. There's plenty of other important decisions that I'm responsible for making. I don't want to make dumb decisions. And you know what? I don't care what I'm wearing. It's a quirk in my personality. I know some of you aren't that way, but like I genuinely don't care. My closet, it looks all the same. It's all the same clothes. Why? So I don't have to make a decision. It's like, what am I going to do on Sabbath? I've already planned it. I don't know. I'm hungry. I want to eat. Whatever I find. I don't have to make a decision on this. So decision making. No catching up on errands. I'm gonna say this, and you're just gonna have to forgive me because I think it makes the point in a blunt way. Eugene Peterson calls that kind of a Sabbath, the day where you try to catch up on errands, a bastard Sabbath. Yeah, that's what I expected. Maybe you need to take a break from technology. Maybe you need to take a break from talking. Now, some people think like that is the most restful thing. Like not talking, that sounds amazing. Some of you need to talk a little bit, okay? You know, like especially if you're married. Like Sabbath is not like, hey, you're not allowed to talk to me for 24 hours. What if you made Sabbath a no fight day? We are not going to fight. And as soon as it feels like we're heading that way, go to your corners, get some water. But here's the deal. You don't serve the Sabbath. The Sabbath serves you. That's what he says. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So what activities or non-activities give you rest and replenish your energy? Find what gives you energy. Do those things. This is where like the introvert extroversion thing comes in. Introvert and extrovert doesn't mean someone's rude or not rude or social or not social. It just is simply a way of designating where you get the most energy. Extroverts get the most energy from people. Introverts get the most energy from being alone. That's simple. It's all that it is. So what gives you the most energy? If you're an introvert, find a way to designate some time to be quiet and alone. If you're an extrovert, find some way in a healthy way to be around people that give you energy. Find what gives you energy and do those things. And the things that drain your energy, don't do those things. Refrain from those things. All right, delight. Quickly, we are terrible at this. When God finished all of creation, he says it was very, very good. That word speaks of completion, wholeness, shalom, delight, and joy. We don't know how to experience joy. So what would be the things that give you joy, that make you happy, make you smile, that make you feel like you're enjoying yourself? When was the last time you played? You did something that constituted play. Just childlike play, not childishness, but childlike play, and you just had fun. One way of asking it, what could you do for 24 hours that would fill your soul with deep throbbing joy? What kinds of activities bring you delight, and how could you incorporate them? Not overly rigidly scheduling them. That would be anti-Sabbath. But making a plan and setting a rigid schedule is not the same thing. Make a plan. Find those things that give you joy and incorporate them. And then contemplate. The Sabbath is always holy to the Lord. It's a day where you ponder the love of God. It's the day where you slow down and enjoy his good gifts. When was the last time you didn't shovel your food in and suck it down? You actually tasted it? Really think about that, where you intentionally took time. You know what the average meal time is now, the average eating time? 10 minutes or less. You know what the average meal time was 150 years ago? An hour and a half. When was the last time you just like ate slow and didn't get indigestion? You actually tasted food. It's this that still makes Sunday, chances are, that could be a Sabbath to you, because it includes the importance of worship. It doesn't have to, but it could. Eugene Peterson says, Sabbath is not primarily about us or how it benefits us. It's about God and how God forms us. And he says, I don't see any way around it. If we're going to live appropriately in the creation that God made, we must keep the Sabbath. This requires planning. It requires some forethought. And I realize, let me say this real quickly. Even talking about this may bring a sense of guilt. Like you feel guilty. You feel guilty taking a day off. You feel guilty resting. But here's the deal, especially if you live with people. You don't rest or convenience yourself at the expense of others. Because remember, in the law of the Sabbath, everybody rested, including the servants. So you didn't inconvenience someone else to convenience yourself. So this is why conversation, planning, discussion, honesty, clarity, communication humility. You might not get your way all the time, especially like if you married your opposite, which is almost every marriage. Where you disagree, you got to find where there might be some common ground, how to plan things together. If you're raising little kids, this is really, really, really hard. So be merciful on yourself. Don't feel guilty, but start talking. Start trying to plan. Start doing your best. Start moving in that direction. Maybe you can't put 24 hours aside. Ultimately, that's the goal. Can you put 6? Can you make 6 hours truly restful, not working, filled with joy and contemplating the Lord? Like could you maybe 8, 12? Just start moving in that direction and move it there with honesty and clarity. It might not be easy at first, like especially if you're married. It might not be easy at first. You might feel guilt, but we'll just remove the guilt. You have permission. God gave it to us. Think of it like this. Sabbath is like receiving the gift of a heavy snow day every week. Stores are closed, roads are impassable. Suddenly you have the gift of a day to do whatever you want. You don't have any obligations, pressures, or responsibilities. You have permission to play, be with friends, take a nap, read a good book. Few of us give ourselves a no obligation day very often. God does every 7th day. And God is giving you permission. Give it a try. Because here's the deal, and I'm going a little long on this one, but I need to point this. Here's the deal. If you don't reserve the Sabbath and start getting in this rhythm, eventually it catches up with you with interest. In Scripture, 2 Chronicles 36, this is sort of like summary statements about the children of Israel going into exile and talking about King Nebuchadnezzar. He took into exile in Babylon those who had escaped from the sword, and they became servants to him and to his sons until the establishment of the kingdom of Persia. Verse 21, to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah until the land had enjoyed its Sabbaths. All the days that it lay desolate, it kept Sabbath. The land kept Sabbath to fulfill 70 years. Basically, the children of Israel were commanded to keep a Sabbath year, once every 7 years. And then that cycle would be every 7 years. And then every seventh year was a year of Jubilee. That would be the 50th year. And because they violated that over and over and over, they paid it back with interest. To where the land vomited them out, and the land had a Sabbath because that Sabbath had been violated for a whole few generations. And so here's what happens. When you and I violate Sabbath, it's not that we become more guilty before God. That didn't do it to us. We're good. We find ourselves guilty before God on our own just fine. Like the Lord Jesus is what brings us forgiveness and innocence, not obeying laws better. But there is something to rhythm. When God makes all of creation with a rhythm and you violate that rhythm, eventually it comes back on you. The way Wayne Muller says it in his book on Sabbath, he says, if you do not allow for a rhythm of rest in our overly busy lives, illness becomes our Sabbath. Our pneumonia, our cancer, our heart attack, our accident creates Sabbath for us. And I'm not saying God does it to you. That's not the case at all. God does not do that to you. But if I run my hand against the grain of a piece of wood and I get a splinter, God didn't do that to me. I did that to myself. And it's just the nature of how things are. Wood has a grain. You go against it, you get a splinter. You go against the grain of God's rhythm of life and creation, you will get a splinter eventually. And so I think there are many, not all, there are many illnesses and injuries that happen because our bodies are crying out for a better rhythm. And so you and I are capable of practicing it with mercy and grace and humility and love for Jesus.